So yeah. So did you want to start?
Well, so we can edit this, whatever. We don't want to just. So I saw you had an interview or a quote by Chip Connolly, a testimonial, and it was funny. I had read his Emotional Equations book, and I thought, like, he writes in such a personal tone, such a personal way. The whole book is written like from the first person perspective. I thought I'd known him. And so I was going to say, hey, we both know someone in common. And we don't at all. But I loved his personal stories. And, you know, you have such an energy about you. We've watched some of your videos. You're in fantastic shape. And that's part of your calling card from all your website descriptions. I was wondering a little bit about your story.
Oh, my personal story? Related to the work that I do now, you mean? Or just my personal story?
Let's talk about the most unhealthy moment, not the most unhealthy moment, but was there ever a phase in life that kind of motivated you to be healthier, or were you always on the health track?
Well, I would say I drank way too much in college.
Okay.
As I think most of us did. And I grew up in a town that was infamously known as the beer drinking capital of the world, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So, and I have to say, I still love wine, but and you can't help but love it if you live in the Bay Area.
Yep.
But in all seriousness, you know, I was really inspired by movement. It's really what kind of saved me as a child. Like, you know, I was a kid who got bored really easily, and I was trying to kind of figure out what's my thing. And I kind of stumbled upon gymnastics, and I just loved it. And it's funny because I was never great at sports. And in fact, you know, I was never one of those kids who was the first picked for any team when we played kickball or whatever in school. And I hated it actually when they did the picking kids for teams. And then I remember very vividly in elementary school one time when we had an activity with obstacle course. And I was so good at it. And I was like, oh my God, this is my thing. I'm good at this. And kind of shortly after that, discovered gymnastics. And that really became my central focus. And, you know, it was where I spent the vast majority of my time. And it was really the center of my social connections growing up. And I mean, my team were like friends I could really count on in a way that I couldn't with friends at school. I felt like that friendships at school were kind of more fluid and kind of in or you're out. Whereas your teammates, they are solid and they're there for you no matter what. But the thing I really discovered with gymnastics and kind of growing up with that was that I felt like that there was a part of me that I could only express through my gymnastics and also just the sense of flying through the air and knowing where I am in space is like the coolest feeling ever.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just is you know, movement as a form of individual and artistic expression, I think is really underestimated. And that's what moves me about movement. It's not so much about the physical benefits and getting in shape, while all of that certainly is great. It's really about how do I express myself in the world. And probably one of my greatest inspirations with that is Martha Graham, who once said, if I could say it, I wouldn't have to dance it. So just like, this is really her way, dance was her way of expressing herself. And Sir Ken Robinson certainly talks about that in his TED Talk about the little girl who went on to become the choreographer for Cats, and just how movement was this little girl's way of personal expression. And so I found, you know, kind of a lifetime of really trying to find a way to be able to kind of stay connected to my body as I kind of moved, you know, graduated from Stanford, trying to kind of find my way in the world, and just always feeling that disconnect between wanting to be doing work that was meaningful and intellectually stimulating, but at the same time not feeling completely disconnected from my body, and really finding it hard to kind of merge those two worlds, where, you know, you could kind of go more of the intellectual route. I studied international relations undergrad, and I really wanted to kind of continue in that pursuit of like political science policy and international relations. But at the same time, I didn't want to be sitting in an office all day. But meanwhile, if I kind of, I also explored the world of fitness, and I felt like I was too disconnected from more of the intellectual kinds of pursuits. So motion infusion was a way to bring those together. Exactly. And so, and I think the other piece about motion infusion that I have increasingly kind of learned along the way is that, we collectively as a society are up against what I call the knowing and doing gap. We've got this tidal wave of poor health and well-being. We are more stressed out, more overweight, sicker than we've ever been before. And it's estimated that unless we do something about this tidal wave, that our children are likely to have a shorter life expectancy than we do for the first time in history. So we've got this big tidal wave, which really comes down to all of us making better choices. And the truth of the matter is that you'd be hard-pressed to find any smoker who doesn't know that smoking is bad for them. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who doesn't know that mindfulness is good for them, or eating more veggies or getting more active is good for them, but people just don't do it. Research shows that less than 3% of the American population puts these 3 basic behaviors into practice. And so it's really, kind of we're up against this conundrum of how do we get ourselves to, quote, do those things we know we should be doing. And what I've really discovered is that my background as an educator has been my sweet spot in the field, and has really enabled me to start to really make a difference in this field and specifically the field of promoting health and well-being in the workplace.
I love it. I love it. I love it. When you said tidal wave, I had this image come up, and I know and throughout the whole book, you mentioned finding purpose and connecting to something greater, and you mentioned that as well with the expression, the kinesthetic expression, which I can relate to as a yoga teacher as well. Absolutely, moving with grace, and not just taking the pose, but being in the pose, and I wonder what that tidal wave of caring for the next generation. I just was curious: is that something that's always been within you, or has that kind of, I really sensed your mission when you said that. And did that snap into place one day? Did it develop over a period of time?
Yeah.
And maybe just some words about that. And I know a lot of other people are stuck at their desk probably wondering, wow, I wish I had a mission. I wish I knew what to, something like that.
Well, it's funny. The whole thing with finding your purpose, if somebody were to ask me, what's your purpose? I would say I have no fucking idea. Seriously, it's like, I don't know what my purpose is, but I just like to feel like I'm making a difference in the world, and I'm a little happier every day because of the work that I do.
Sure.
And I feel like that there's kind of threads that are meaningful and provide purpose for me. So one thread is movement, and it's been personally meaningful for me, and I see the impact that it has on others as well, and see that as a society we have become increasingly sedentary, and that when we move, not only do we get healthier, but we get happier and we get smarter. Really cool research around what it does for our brains. Mm-hmm. So there's that thread. There's the thread of basically, like, WTF, like, everybody needs to wake up to the fact that we've got this giant tidal wave, and if we don't figure it out, all of us are in a lot of trouble. And I think that really appealing to people's sense of the moral imperative of this, like, okay, maybe you don't care about yourself, maybe you don't really care about your peers that much, but I think we can all agree that we care about our kids. Yeah. And it's a kind of a similar thing that when we talk about what we're doing to the environment, let's think about what that means for our children. My family's been going to Maine for my whole life. Actually, we have a place that we've been going to since my great-grandparents. And in 1 year, this just happened a few years ago, the rocks were always covered with mussels. Mm-hmm. And in 1 year, they were gone, completely gone, because most likely because of global warming. And so to think that future generations are going to come up to this place, this treasured place in Maine, and are never going to see those mussels on the rocks anymore, it's mind-boggling to really consider that. So I think whether it's for our health or whether it's the health of our planet, we got to think about what all of this means for our kids.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the point that you make about global warming, there's for any of our listeners that find themselves in Chicago, I recently went to the Innovation Museum out there, and they had a whole exhibit on the ice caps. And obviously, like we realize, at least if we pay attention to the science, like what's going on in our environment, but to see the difference in just a year's time it's terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so I do want to go back to one point that you made a little bit earlier, about kind of starting with the movement. So a big part of what I see in your book is not only just wellness for the workplace, but it's also wellness in your life, right?
Yeah.
And how to approach it in a way that you can get to that self-actualization better. And it sounds to me that you're at a space where you feel like you're doing that for yourself. Now, you talk about adapting basically adapting Maslow's hierarchy into a much more simplified simplified hierarchy, which is basically get healthy, get happy, get smarter. And I love that because I think we overcomplicate it. And I think we, a lot of this when we're talking about the environment or just our interaction with others, we have it backwards.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about that for people that might be earlier in their career or maybe just that piece hasn't clicked to them.
Yeah.
How can we start, from this kind of perspective? How can we shift our mindset to realizing how to climb our way up?
So how to create our own kind of version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for our own lives, you mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have Chip Conley to thank for that modified.
Which equation did he do?
He organized a workshop for friends, and one of the exercises was to take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, as you all know, is what has really inspired him and the work that he's done, and is the inspiration behind his book Peak, meaning like peak performance, peak inspiration. And so he used Maslow's hierarchy of needs and modified it into 3 levels as opposed to 5. And one of the ways that he has used it historically in the workplace is kind of a pyramid of, are you in a job, lowest level, or is this a career, 1 level up, or is this your calling? And having these really transparent conversations with team members in the workplace, like, which of these is it? And being vulnerable about sharing, wow, right now I feel like this is a job and not my calling, and what do I need to do so that I can kind of get back to my calling? So we had an exercise where we actually sat down and thought about, whatever is our purpose and what's meaningful to us, and applying that to the work that we do, what might be a modified Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so that was the one that I came upon, mapping this to movement. And then you may recall from my book also, I modified Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but on 5 levels, to think about the 5 F factors in relation to a healthy workplace and what that means. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's a lot of people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's just, Maslow was really one of the early pioneers around reframing what the purpose of psychology is. Like, psychology is not just about studying people who are sick and really screwed up, but it's also about, it's studying people who are great and exceptional, and what is it that they do to become fully, quote, actualized, which is such a 70s term. it really is something I think that we're continuing to try to figure out. And so we kind of modified Maslow today to think about, how does this work for us? What's the language that works for us? But the idea of being, first and foremost, we have to fulfill our basic needs, but then we kind of move up the chain. And one of the things I think that's really interesting about looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that in some ways it's inverse, like especially with health and wellness, is that in some ways health is something that is so basic that we don't want to think about it. We want to think about higher order needs. We want to think about it's like basically, I don't give a shit about being healthy. I want to be super smart and I want to be a high performer at work. And in fact, I care so much about that I'm going to put my health aside to be able to really be a top performer. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing in this space is really around educating, especially managers. We've had a really a primary focus on managers, and I can tell you more about that and why. But really educating managers, but also employees and leaders around, hey, you want to be a top performer? Health is not a nice to have. Health and doing things like moving throughout the day, that's going to help you in the here and now, not just helping you like way out in the future. Who cares if I have a heart attack 10 years from now? I care about right now. So if you care about right now and you want to have a high performing team right now, this is the way that wellness has everything to do with becoming a top-notch leader, manager, and building a high-performing team.
Okay, so I'm totally on your boat. I'm going to play devil's advocate, though. Because I know there are some people that say, yeah, I know I should exercise. Yeah, it'll probably increase, maybe it'll increase my productivity. They're probably thinking, maybe, I don't know, I got a lot of work to do. Giving 3 to 5 hours to the gym or walking or whatever, that's too much. That's too much. And then that person probably would say something like, can you dive a little bit deeper into how wellness links up to productivity?
I know what you're saying. And the truth of the matter is that, what the research is increasingly showing is that it's less about going to the gym and it's more about moving throughout the day. So less about getting that workout and more about how might I take, every hour stand up for 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. Or every time I take a phone call, stand up when I'm taking the phone call. Or go to the printer that's a little bit further away. Or maybe after that intense conversation that I had with 2 people known as Nick and Jared, I'm going to go for a walk around the block, right? To kind of restore myself. So language, and again, this really comes down to wordsmithing. I think we have to do a better job of wordsmithing. One phrase that I wish were my own, but it's not, is a phrase that I got from Tony Schwartz and Jim Lair, co-authors of a book called The Power of Full Engagement. They wrote a long time ago. Both of them kind of spun off, started 2 different companies from there. But and Tony Schwartz is actually more popularly known right now because he wrote he was the writer for Donald Trump's book on the art of making a deal, right? And then he came out and spoke out against Donald Trump. So he's been in the news a lot for that. But at any rate, they talk about this concept of managing your energy, not your time. So both of them are former sports psychologists. They did a lot of work with athletes, and they were kind of studying, like, what is it that makes a distinction between a high-performing athlete versus one who's not as high-performing? And so they applied some of those things that they learned from working with athletes to then working in a corporate environment and coined this phrase of, quote, corporate athlete. And so what they talk about is really reframing wellness and doing things like going for a walk getting exercise, as you're talking about, Jared, in the context of energy. Mm-hmm. So they talk about, they even create this nice little graph. So x-axis is our energy level and y-axis is our output level. So when we're at maximum energy, maximum output, this is when we're in our performance zone. So this is your top right quadrant. Right. And what invariably happens for all those, type A high performers is like, I got to keep doing things right. I got to keep sustaining that same level of output. And so we are human beings. We're not machines. And so we start to move into what they characterize as survival zone. So this is top left quadrant. So for a short period of time, we're able to sustain the same level of output, but our energy is starting to go down. So this is when we're reaching for the quick fixes, the coffee, the sugar, the chocolate, whatever it takes to be able to sustain that level of output. But invariably, no matter how many quick fixes we apply to the situation, invariably we're going to our output will start to go down. And so this is when we start to hit that bottom left quadrant of burnout. And this is a cycle that many of us go through over and over and over again. And, and it happens on a company level too. I mean, look at what happened to Enron, churn and burn, and that just like tore up the organization. You could say that they hit total burnout. And so an alternative is to alternate between performance zone and then restoration zone, which is you intentionally reduce your output temporarily. And if you take those proactive restoration breaks, your net productivity will go up. So maybe your face time is going to go down, but your net productivity will go up. And I think the problem is that we've got way too many organizations that put such a high premium on the face time. They have no idea how productive or how unproductive people are actually being, but all they care about is the face time, because they think that face time equals productivity. I mean, case in point, one law firm a friend of mine worked in, it was a cultural norm that when you left at the end of the day, you left your jacket on the back of your chair so that people would think that you were still at work. I mean, talk about a screwed up culture. That is unreal, because there's so much pressure around this FaceTime. And I can't even imagine how, what that means for their real productivity, as opposed to a company that has more of a culture of understanding that we have to proactively restore in order to increase our overall performance. So I think that analogy and that concept of managing your energy, not your time, that is something that I use over and over again. I think it's really effective in helping even those disbelieving managers and leaders to understand that there's real value in terms of the here and now around productivity, building a high-performing team by investing in well-being along the way.
Right. So I'm curious, because part of this you also mentioned is if you are a type A person, being able to shift between type B behaviors, right? More, interact with people more, trying to be nicer to people, slow down. But there's also this sort of, I think, for a lot of type A people, I've always been a very competitive, very driven person myself, where finding that balance of what's too much stress and just that like healthy amount of stress is difficult. And this is something that you kind of mentioned in this vein as well. So how do we, put ourselves into this peak zone? This is also something that Stephen Kotler, if you're familiar, he wrote the book, I think it was called The Rise of the Superhuman. Have you heard of this? He did
Rise of the Web?
Sorry?
Rise of the Web?
I think it's called The Rise of the Superhuman, or The Rise of Superhuman. Okay. And he mentions this as well as how do we get into that state of flow? But from your perspective, I mean, how can we get ourselves, manage our energy properly and manage our priorities, I guess, to allow us to get into this enough stress where we're increasing our productivity and we're feeling like we're engaged, but not going overboard?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is, we've kind of ended up in this scenario where there's been so much around the negative effects of stress. So now we're stressed about being stressed. And it's like, oh God. I think we've got enough stress that we don't have to worry about finding the stress. And if anything, I think even though there's been a lot of discussion about stress, we live in a culture that really kind of adulates stress. Kind of case in point, you run into somebody in the street and you're like, how are you doing? And they say, oh, I'm super stressed. And they say, oh, you think you're stressed? Let me tell you how stressed I am. And you guys have the stress competition. We all do it, because whoever's the most stressed is the most important, right? So, but I think the thing that's kind of interesting is we actually don't have to be afraid of stress, because it's really more about what do you do in response to stress. And what the research shows is that acute stress can actually enhance performance. And what we really want to steer away from is chronic stress. So I love, this idea, researchers are talking about this idea of, you kind of like some are even talking about sharpening your stress, like freaking go with it. You're feeling stressed, like just embrace it, because that can be really energizing. I think about like as a gymnast, like I would get really pumped up and excited about a meet, and that stress, which is what it was also a critical part of my performance. Or like anytime now I get stressed, but that's energizing and that's good. So it's really about, how do I manage that stress in the moment? Like, I don't want to be so stressed out when I'm about to give a talk that I walk up on stage and I'm speechless. So, what are some strategies that I can do to kind of manage that stress in the moment? So one thing that I do now every time before I go on stage, like, right before they're, when they're introducing me, I'm getting ready to go on, I'm like, oh shit, I'm about to go on and I'm nervous. So I stand in my power pose, which is the Amy Cuddy stuff about, when you stand in your power pose, your confidence goes up, stress goes down. So I do that. Right, exactly. Yes. Well demonstrated. But then, thinking about, like maybe I gave a big talk that day and I'm amped up and then I can't sleep that night. That starts to move more into chronic stress. And it's one thing to have one sleepless night, but night after night after night after night where I'm not sleeping. So this is where you have to start thinking about what are those practices that you can start to adopt that work for you, because there is no one right way to do it. So it might be, the way that works for you is painting. Like apparently Eisenhower was a painter. Isn't it? He was president. Kind of a weird story, but my uncle was friends with his son, and my uncle was there in the White House one time, and like at the swimming pool with his friend, and he kind of like was looking around for the bathroom, and he opened a door, and there was Eisenhower sitting in there, doing little guy doing a painting. Like apparently that's what he did to manage his stress. Like, okay, whatever it is that helps you to kind of like, kind of go into your green zone, or maybe it's like hanging out with friends or going to a movie, whatever it is that just kind of helps you to come back to an equilibrium. So kind of, it's like, on a more physiological level, it's basically you have a stress response, which is activating your sympathetic nervous system. And then you need to offset that by activating your so-called parasympathetic nervous system, which is your resting and digesting nervous system. So it's like one or the other is on. And so, if I have an experience where I'm like stressed out and I'm like high performing, hard driving type A, then I need to think about offsetting that with some type B, kind of more chill out, so I can activate my resting and digesting, because that's what enables me to be able to sleep well at night, to be able to digest my food, and all those things that we need to do to rebuild our bodies.
Yeah.
So one more thing. So you mentioned sleep on there, and this is actually something that we get all the time. We do a coaching service as well, and we're constantly asked about, I'm getting these sleepless nights. How can I improve our quality of sleep? And there's a lot that's starting to come out about sleep hygiene and making sure that caffeine in our system and all of this. But I mean, what are some of the things that work for you in terms of even if there was stress throughout the day, how can we get ourselves back down and get ourselves to a place where, because you mentioned that sleep is often one of the most underappreciated, but one of the critical pieces to managing your energy, right? Yeah. So how do we get this better quality of sleep? How do we get, allow ourselves to let go of what's going on in the day, recharge our batteries and get going?
One thing I recently learned that's kind of interesting is getting exposure to natural light, getting outside, and being sure to get that in the morning time. And we are really susceptible to light, and this is one of the problems with having bright light exposure late at night, and especially having that blue light. So you don't want to be on your computer late at night, which I'm guilty of. So I'm not pretending like I've got all this stuff figured out, but I really try to get morning time natural sunlight exposure. So for example, when I was writing my book, there was this, we live right by the water, 2 blocks away from the water, and there's this really cool little coffee kiosk that serves awesome 4-barrel coffee. And I would go there every morning, and that was my break to not only to have a nice latte, but also to, sit outside and get that natural light. So that's one thing that has really been shown to be really important. Then also doing the things like really thinking about your environment. Like every time I go into a hotel room, I'm always covering up all the like red lights that are in the room. It's like I feel like I'm in an airport terminal. Like, I'm going to take off. So I go around and I throw my clothes on everything to cover up those lights so that it's dark. I like it to be really dark, closing up the curtains. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. I have definitely struggled with insomnia at different points in my life. And one thing I found, when I'm talking about like in the moment, like, oh man, I can't sleep again kind of thing. And I read this in a magazine, I change locations. So I'll go and I'll sleep on the couch, get up out of my bed, go rest on the couch for a little bit, and then when I start to relax more, then I go back into my bed, because apparently what you don't want to do is you don't want to develop an association with like my bed. Oh, that's the place where I can't sleep. So anytime you start to have trouble sleeping, get up out of that bed, go someplace else, kind of talk yourself down off the tree or whatever it is that's happening for you. And, like in my case, like I gave a keynote and I'm like, oh, all the things that I could have done better. Why did I do that? Right. And I'm running through all that. So run through all that in another location and then come back to my bed.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great tactic.
And going back to kind of the motivational side of things, and we were talking about kind of productivity and switching up the lifestyles and things like that. And I could totally see how people would say, yeah, I do need to do this. And then they would actually start doing it. But I see this all the time as a trainer. They sign up and they have all the motivation in the world, and then they burn out or drop off after a few weeks. And I know in your 10 steps, there's a good 3 or 4 of them, or maybe even more, that deal with taking small steps, nudging, intrinsic motivation, taking an integrative approach, using different language. And I think these are all approaches that can be embedded into a new wellness initiative on an organizational level or a personal level. And since we tend to deal with more at a personal level, I'm thinking more in those terms. But instead of just setting some arbitrary behavioral goal, like I'm going to go to bed earlier, I'm going to go on a walk, I'm going to do NEAT, the small movement thing. I'm going to do this, and then they do it for 3 weeks and they quit. Right? So like, what are some things we can do to basically not quit? Maybe, I know you got a bunch of your steps, so maybe you just run through that.
It's interesting. I want to kind of coincidentally, so my fiance, he was an athlete in college, very, and has been a surfer and very athletic most of his life. And then a few years ago, really started kind of dropping off in terms of his level of physical fitness, and was really stressed out by stuff at work. And so was stressed out, wasn't exercising, gained some weight, and then had a health scare where he basically went to the hospital, and they were like, your blood pressure is so high right now, you've got like stroke level blood pressure right now. So he had to go on blood pressure medication, and but he really decided to make some changes. And interestingly enough, one of the things that he did is he joined the Dolphin Club. And I don't know if you know anything about the Dolphin Club, but they're San Francisco, just, old school San Francisco club that's been, and club not in your typical sense. I mean, this is like every person's club. And it's been around for like 100 years, and they're into cold water swimming. So they swim in the bay here, and the culture there is that you swim without a wetsuit. And it is this community of people of all ages. I'm talking people into their 90s who share this passion for swimming in the bay with no wetsuit. And so he joined the Dolphin Club, and it has transformed his life. It really has. He's lost 20 pounds. He has gotten himself off of blood pressure medication. His cholesterol actually had spiked, and they were wanting to put him on medication for that. And he was like, no, give me some time. So his cholesterol's come down. At UCSF, they're like, oh my God, they couldn't believe it. They're like, you are a model patient for us. I wish all of our patients were like you. I mean, in 3 months, he changed his blood pressure, changed his cholesterol. And this Dolphin Club has really become a community for him. So, he goes there, and he loves the activity itself. And I just think that, people are looking for, what's the latest and greatest, the best way to lose weight. It's like, doesn't matter what's the best way to lose weight. What matters is that you find something that you love to do. So whether it's going to hip hop class or swimming in the bay with no wetsuit, doesn't matter. Find something that you love to do, and then find a friend, as in find a community. And so, for him now, he goes to the Dolphin Club. He's got this whole cool community, and it's really transformed his experience in living. He's been living in San Francisco for like 25 years, and he's like, this has transformed my experience living in San Francisco. And, he swims in the water, and then he goes and hangs out in the sauna with these crazy people at the Dolphin Club. And, it's just this really cool community. I think it's a great example of, while he hasn't necessarily planned it this way, he has effectively been tapping into those things that really drive us on an intrinsic level. So one of them being competency. So, they have these like polar bear challenges where like, can you swim 40 miles in the dead of winter in this freezing cold water, right? Or going on, 40 miles over like, this kind of thing. Or, having these planned expeditions where, you all swim together, where you swim to Alcatraz and around Alcatraz and back, no wetsuit, so competency. And then another one is relatedness, the power of being in connection with others. So you're, part of this community. So I think that those are the kinds of things that really make a difference. And then ultimately, I think, for every organization and for every manager to be thinking about, I think that collectively all of us need to stop pointing fingers at the individual and blaming people for being unhealthy, blaming people for being fat or whatever it is, or being stressed out, and recognize that all of us are much more creatures of culture and environment than we are creatures of habit. And so it is no coincidence that there are these hotbeds of longevity, these so-called blue zones around the world. It's not because people in Sardinia, for example, are that much more motivated than any one of us. It's just that they happen to have been born into a culture that has some practices that really promote longevity. So things like, there's nobody who's living in an old person's home. They all live with their family, and they have a continued sense of purpose, which is to contribute to the family unit, even as they get older. Those are the kinds of things that really make a difference. So the exciting thing is that every company and every manager, as a leader of their team, has an opportunity to be able to create an oasis of well-being that counters the effects of a larger toxic environment and larger toxic culture. So, for us to blame people for eating so much more, more sugar than we used to, it's like, that's total bullshit. It's more about the fact that food manufacturers have loaded up processed foods with sugar, salt, and fat, and so we cannot help but eat more than one of that Lay's potato chips or whatever it is. Like they have truly created addictive food-like substances, and we are surrounded by that. Not to mention the fact that every neighborhood is better designed for cars than it is for us getting physically active. I mean, you could go on any, look at every aspect of our culture and our environment, and it promotes the antithesis of good health and well-being. So conversely, every company, every organization has an opportunity to be able to counter that with really thinking very intentionally about how do we optimize the culture and how do we optimize the environment. And every manager can think about, okay, within my team, how do I optimize the practices within my team to kind of, no matter what's happening in the larger organization, I can create an oasis of well-being for my team. And in doing so, I can create a pocket of excellence that will create a kind of a ripple effect throughout the organization. Yeah. So that's I was alluding to this earlier. That's the primary work that we're doing now is, quote, activating managers to become, quote, managers on the move or multipliers of well-being. And what the research is really showing is that it really comes down to the manager, even more so than the senior leaders, to effectively give permission to their team members to engage with well-being or to be well when they are at work. So, you have manager X who sends emails at 11 o'clock at night. They're setting a culture within their team that if you're a high-performing member of the team, that you respond to that email at 11 o'clock. right? As opposed to being in bed, resting, getting well rested to have a productive day the next day. So our Managers on the Move initiative is about activating managers in 3 domains, which is specifically do, speak, and create. So every manager were to do, as in lead by example, so do it themselves, be a role model of well-being, speak about it, kind of think about engaging their team members in well-being one conversation at a time, and then finally create, as in create systems and rituals that normalize well-being within their team. We could make a huge difference in the level of well-being for every employee.
Totally. So I have one follow-up question on that really fast. So
Yeah.
if there's a club or a community, right, that's existing, we can, outside of work, we can use things like meetup.com. If there are existing things within work, we can kind of find those people by just communicating. But we also talk about a little bit about, you know, how to start a movement, right? And more specifically, when we're actually trying to get these things done, if we're the one that are starting it all, right? You talk about building a team, right? You need a team around you. And you talk specifically about the Da Vinci approach. So I'm curious to see, you know, how do you identify people that have these different experiences and these different talents and convictions to bring to the table, but around a similar mission? How do you find them? How do you identify them? And how do you utilize them best to really get this going, whether it's in the workplace or in your life, just, you know, getting people moving together?
Yeah, well, let's say in the workplace. I mean, I think, you know, in building your, quote, Da Vinci team, which is this, you know, the idea of leveraging Da Vinci, who recognize the value of a multidisciplinary approach to create great ideas. The idea is that, you know, typically what I see over and over again is companies say, okay, we're going to do wellness. So, you know, we're going to identify a few volunteers to create this wellness committee. And, you know, these few volunteers are going to have to create programs for the whole company. You know, like we've got like 50,000 employees, and these few people are going to design programs that are going to, you know, make all make it ridiculous. Or maybe they'll hire one wellness program manager, so it's like one solo person who's supposed to transform the health of 50,000 people. Like, give me a break. So, you know, what I really, you know, taking a Da Vinci approach to change really goes hand in hand with going stealth. So this idea of stop calling it wellness, stop building standalone wellness programs, and look for, quote, stealth opportunities, as in think programs and initiatives that are already up and running, that already get a lot of resources and time and credence. So things like safety is a big one. Every organization that has safety concerns, safety is you know, top of mind, and there's time and resources that are being put towards safety. So with every safety initiative, there should be discussion about wellness. I mean, it's crazy to not include that. Or every leadership development program should incorporate some well-being in it, and some discussion about energy management. And you know, do you have the energy that you need to be an effective leader? And are you building a winning team? All of that should be incorporated in every single leadership development course, or every single management training program. Every onboarding session, every staff meeting should incorporate well-being. So if you think about it, you know, who are the key players in those different stealth opportunities? That's your Da Vinci team. And you know, just recently I was delivering a Managers on the Move workshop, and this guy from IT, we were chatting during one of the breaks, and he's like, you know what? Like, I'm a perfect stealth person, because people love IT. They get so excited, you know, they've got some kind of technology problem, and then IT comes in and saves the day. And he's like, I could be a stealth agent. Like, I could come in like, here, I'll solve your IT issue. And by the way, let me, you know, talk with you a little bit about well-being. And so those are the kinds of, you know, it's really about looking for those unlikely partners who can really be your agents of change. And I think, you know, especially if you can get some people who are non-believers who then experience something, they're like, whoa, this stuff actually is really important. You know, I mean, kind of case in point, you know, I tell the story a lot about Jamie Dimon, who, you know, high performing CEO, and then he gets diagnosed with throat cancer and suddenly realizes like, oh my gosh, health is really foundational to everything. And so he wrote this memo that went out to everybody in the organization about, you know, I have discovered in my own process that health is really what matters most. And I'm so appreciative to all of the support that I receive from my colleagues, from my friends, from my family. So I want you to know that as your leader, this is what I value most. So he was kind of an unlikely member of that Da Vinci team, if you will, to really promote well-being at JP Morgan.
I love it. I love it. And as we start to wrap down, could you tell us a little bit about the work you do? It sounds like you did it already, talking about activating managers and where people can find you. And I know you're a speaker as well, and maybe you could just mention a little bit about that. And
sure. Yeah.
With one final question.
So 2 websites. One is motioninfusion.com. and the other is lauraputnam.com. So Motion Infusion is the company that I started in 2008. And the primary services that we offer is the program I was mentioning, Managers on the Move, which is a program that activates managers to become those multipliers of well-being. It's a day-long training. We've been doing this workshop around the country and soon to get some international requests. And that's actually a partnership with a company that we collaborate with called ProChange Behavior Systems. They are the ones who are measuring the impact of this workshop pre and post, looking at the impact both on the participating managers as well as their team members. So we're measuring a trickle-down effect, measuring positive effects in the areas of productivity, measuring positive impacts in the areas of engagement with work, and also measuring positive impact on well-being, and seeing that there's some real changes that managers are making in these areas of do, speak, and create. The so-called hero form proceedings, and this is on the Laura Putnam website under media, just published our latest findings on that, so you can find out more by going to that. But in addition to Managers on the Move, I do a lot of train the trainer for HR professionals, for wellness professionals, consultants, wellness program managers around this workplace wellness that works. So inspired by workplace wellness that works. And Managers on the Move is actually the topic for my next book that I'm working on right now. So that'll be a guide for managers on how to become more effective leaders. And then the other piece is I do a ton of speaking, and that's actually what I do most. So I do a lot of speaking at company events or at conference events, and as a keynote, or sometimes I'm brought in by senior leader teams, and trying to figure out what's our strategy around wellness. So those are the main.
Nick and I met at Toastmasters. Yep.
Oh, cool! That's awesome. That's great. Yeah.
Speakers Unite.
Oh, and you got the book, Workplace Wellness That Works?
Yes.
Amazon.
Yes.
Yep. We got it right
Amazon here. Or Barnes & Noble. So that's a great place to get that. But on both motioninfusion.com as well as lauraputnam.com, I've got all the information about upcoming events. And then I also have a newsletter that anybody can sign up for. You can just go to, again, either lauraputnam.com or motioninfusion.com, and there's a place where you can sign up to join the newsletter.
Perfect. So the last question, we love to finish off all of our podcast episodes with this. 30 seconds or less.
Okay.
What is your number one piece of advice, or the number one life hack that you could give to somebody that they can, something actionable that they can start to do today to start improving their wellness and their well-being?
I think the number one thing that people can do is they can shift their mindset from thinking about health and wellness as something being about personal choice, and that it is in fact more about community choice, because there is a well-documented phenomenon known as the social contagion effect, meaning that every time I make a choice, whether it's positive or negative, I create a ripple effect, meaning that I influence not only my friends, but my friends' friends, and even my friends' friends' friends. So if we truly care about our friends, our family, our community, our world, one of the very best things that each of us can do is to start with ourselves, and is to invest in our own personal health and well-being. And in doing so, that is probably one of the very best things that we can do for our community.
Awesome. We really appreciate it, Laura. Again, it's Laura Putnam. She has amazing content. Go check it out. Thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And have a great
Thank
rest of the
you.
day.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.